So thank you everybody for attending this very interesting webinar today. The topic of today will be the post-COVID-19 world will be more or less globalized. This is Ambrosetti Community China chapter and Ambrosetti Club event. And we have as our guest two very prestigious economists. From China, we have Professor Fan Gang, and from Italy, we have Professor Michele Geraci.
Good morning, everyone.
Michele, ciao.
Good morning. Thank
Good afternoon from China.
Very good, thank you. So let's start with the conversation today about this topic, and thank you very much for joining us and giving your availability to share your viewpoint. First of all, since in this webinar we will have two speakers, and therefore also on the Q&A we will need to be able to address the questions that you will raise to one or the other speaker. I would suggest that when you book your questions at the very beginning, you write the name of the speaker you would like to address the question to. If there will be no specific name, I will raise the questions for both the panelists, and we'll allow to both of them in turn to comment on the topic. As a request of both the panelists, we decided to have a more interactive approach today. So we will have shorter opening remarks from each of the two speakers, and then I will have a conversation with them, and they will interact in between each other as well, commenting each other's point, so that we can have a more in-depth and focused conversation. So I will let Professor Michele Geraci to have his first, let's say, about 10 minutes opening remarks on the topic. And Michele, do you think this COVID-19 crisis will leave us more or less globalized? Will we move towards the scaling of the globalization, or we will move towards new edge globalization?
Thank you for the question, Mattia. I give you the short answer. My view is that at the end of this virus, we will be more globalized, not less, like maybe some other people believe. I will give you a few minutes reasons why I think so, and I will try to separate some opinions from facts. I start maybe with my views, and then I conclude with some data maybe supporting what I say. I think the global value chain and the interconnection between countries and companies is more integrated than people think. We all know there is a high value of integration, but I want to show you later with some figures that the reality is even more tight than the initial perception. So any possible disengagement with globalization will be harder than people believe. The reason why I think China in particular will continue to be a main player, and this answers the question of will the West disengage from China, is that I think China is in a unique situation at this stage of globalization, where we have pretty much half of what is produced, what is made, manufactured around the world, is made in China. And of course, this is a general figure. And so that means that we are living in what Paul Krugman describes as a new trade theory world, where the country that has reached first the scale higher than any other countries in the world, a scale that in a manufacturing industry tends to lower the average cost of the goods, will gain a very, very high comparative advantage versus all the other countries in the world. So it is as if we're moving from a Ricardian view of the world where countries trade with each other because of relative advantage into almost back to an absolute situation where those countries, those companies that have a scale will dominate. And this is not true just in manufacturing, but more so, for example, in the software industry, where of course scale with pretty much zero marginal cost dominates the competitive strength. So this vision of China being the main producer of both hardware and now software will make this deglobalization very, very difficult, because China, as often is the case, uses the crisis to accelerate the transition into developing of artificial intelligence, smart working. And we're already seeing these days, even here in Italy and in other countries that I've talked to, even in Asia, in India and so on, that this crisis is accelerating what we call it remote working, especially in teaching, in remote diagnosis. I see this on myself. My classes and even events like this are more and more done online. Now, to me, this is a sign of more integration, not less integration, but it will be a different kind of globalization. Maybe less physical trips, maybe more online activities, and the result would be more competition, more integration between countries. The West maybe thinks that they can onshore some of the production because of the problem we've seen in China, the problem that we've seen in other parts of Asia, and maybe some countries want to, including Italy, they want to be less dependent on international partners to produce their own goods. And so this is the people who say we will move into a less globalized world. Of onshoring of production, in my view, is a wishful thinking that will not happen very easily. And so you hear a lot about it, but very little activity. What could happen, perhaps, is less emphasis from the European and Western countries into outsourcing the whole of the production into China, as it has been, and maybe move some into other regions of the world. It's not going to be back into Europe. It may be, instead of relying entirely on China, there would be a diversifying effect into other parts of the world. And I'm thinking part of Southeast Asia, of course, but also Africa, that has a lot of untapped potential. So in a way, I see more globalization and less dependent on China. China itself will reuse this to move along its own path into high-tech and advanced manufacturing, advanced technology. So in a way, this will not be a damage for China, because China will just react by accelerating its own reliance on domestic demand and less on external demand. At the same time, there will be an opportunity for other parts of the world to develop their own play in their own role in the world. So the world will be more globalized. There will be new members, new countries coming into this game, less on China, more in others, for the overall result of being more global. And in that respect, if I may, the MOU that we did last year on the One Belt, One Road, of course, I didn't know that we would go into this crisis, into this health crisis, less so into this major economic crisis. Actually, those initiatives, regardless of the political implication that we may not care so much for the time being, these are the initiatives that I think there will be more and more of, just to allow these new players in the world to understand and know more about each other. Because let's be honest, the general the general public and many of the entrepreneurs who have not been involved in international trade are not very well aware of the economic dynamics in certain parts of the world. So government to government activity, university, exchange, events like this one you're organizing today do play a very important role because they increase the knowledge of otherwise less known countries, and that gives opportunity to our company. I'm talking now specifically to Italian companies. They need to decide what they want to do with a economic that is going to go -10, -15% this year, and they need to look at external demand to compensate, but also international cooperation. So crisis would bring at least at company level, they need to be more and more integrated with each other and cooperate more. So I think I will see not just more outsourcing of production into these new parts of the world, but also more agreements between countries, between companies that would complement international organizations' efforts. And if I may conclude only with just one example of how much Italy is integrated with China in terms of exports. I just show you in 1 minute one simple slide that starts from where is it that we have official figures of Italian exports to China. This is in US dollar. We have about 15 billion. And this is what we think this is what we think Italy sells to China. Now, one by one, there are other things. This is only exports of goods. Then there is Italian goods that end up in China via third countries. This is the famous Rotterdam or Antwerp effect. And that adds another 5.6 billion. This is not accounted in the official statistic of Italian Istat, which underestimates. Then there is services. We always forget about services. There's another 2 billion of Italian exports to China. That's not all. Then we have the big part, which is Italian components that go into other countries, get assembled and then resold into China. This is about 10 billion. And the classic example is the northeast of Italy selling automobile components to Germany. This is 10 billion that Italy sells not to China directly, but to the rest of Europe, a lot to Germany, France, and they will then end up into China. So these are consumed by China. And then these add up to a total Italian exports for Chinese final consumption. So from 15 billion, we almost double it to 32 billion. We are not done yet, because then we have another component, another 3 billion the Italian company sells to China, but not for final consumption. But this is now China that reassemble and resells them to other countries. So China acts as a bridge. Total of 36 billion of Italian export that somehow relate to Chinese demand. Of these 36 billion of Italian, let's say, overall exports to China, a lot relates to domestic added value. If I subtract about 7.6 billion that comes from other countries importing to Italy, Italy transforms these goods and reproduce 36 billion of exports. The impact of Italy-China trade on Italian GDP is 28 billion. Again, almost double the initial 15 billion. This is just, and I stop here, this is just an example of how much more integrated the trade is, much more than the official figures indicate. From 50 billion, we think we complain it's not a lot. 28 billion is not a lot, but it's much more. And the fact that it is not just Italy to China, but goes via Holland, by Belgium, by Germany, by France, it makes this more complex and more vulnerable to variations in the final demand. That's why at the beginning of February, when we were predicting Chinese demand going down by 20%, that was already, for me, a hit on Italian GDP of 0.5% of GDP, Italian GDP loss, only as a result of lack of Chinese demand. Now, of course, we're talking about 10% and more. And this crisis will indicate, unfortunately, how the global value chain is integrated, because we are now seeing the effect, the famous butterfly in Beijing causing a storm around the world. But this is not from Beijing, it's just in a sequence of countries from countries. And this will be an empirical evidence for the first time of the integration of the global value chain. I stop here. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much, Michele. Professor Fan, can we have your point of view on the topic we are discussing today?
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much. I think this is a very illegible question for the globalization, particularly during this pandemic. Well, talking this topic, let's look at the some facts in past several months. China got two hit for its supply chain. First one is because of China. We locked down, we have social distance, we actually stopped the production. Then we got the problem with the international supply chain. We created, maybe at that time, we created a problem for the international supply chain because of the delay of Chinese delivery of the goods. Then when the other countries start to have this pandemic, then China got the problem. We start to reopen the factory, start to restart the production, but then we do not have supply, and we do not have. We lost the orders, and if even we want to produce for the domestic market, we do not have the supply of the goods from our international partners. So that means it raised the question. I mean, this pandemic raised the question about the globalization. However, I actually very agree, Mr. Gracchi just said. I think the globalization will continue. This is not a for some politicians or some scholars, we want it or do not want it. But I think the company want it, the people want it, right? However, this pandemic raised the question, we may need some adjustment of the global supply chain. For example, if the supply came from very far distance, you need a very high quality of logistic system, and you need a lot of the transportation. So, and you need it will be very urgent to have adjustment of your supply chain. If it's too long, if it's too far from the country, then you got the problem. I think the medical supplies really, got this problem during this pandemic. So that's give the people the feeling that we may need something alternative from the supply from China, an alternative we can look at nearby, in not very. First of all, it's a different resources, and secondly, it could be nearby. You can adjust the transportation quickly. So that's why my prediction is that number one, after this pandemic, everybody will look for some alternative, not only concentrate on one supplier, two suppliers, but we need multiple suppliers. So it's still globalization, but globalization with the multiple supply chain, rather very simple one, rely on one source. And secondly, I think it could be some kind of regionalization of globalization, meaning that geographically we need some kind of the supply system in one region, one big region. For example, in Asia, China, Japan, Korea is a big market, and then we may organize, or there's going to be a merging system that we can find all the resources, all the semi-product in the region. So if something happened in the global sense, we can quickly adjust within the region. And Europe as well, Europe, Central Europe, and North Africa, maybe another zone, another region, which have the somehow independent system, which can be an alternative to the international. In the normal time, people still maybe rely on the suppliers from far away, but with this kind of the alternative regional supply system, it could have the security for the supply chain. The same thing for America as a whole, North America, South America, NAFTA, all those, American now say very much that America need a independent system, so they may have some alternative. So it could be more like a, time zone, regional supply system, but this is still globalization, meaning that number one, the different companies from different countries may operate in the different zones. Not only Chinese company only in Asia, European company only in Europe. European company could be in both Asia and America, and Chinese as well. So that's one thing. Secondly, the market is still shared by everybody, right? Still shared by all the country, and in different the region, there's a different company from different continent, different time zone. So that is still globalization, but more regionalization could happen. And also, I think we will have a better version of globalization after this pandemic. We find a lot of the problems, loopholes. If we want to use the alternative, if we want to keep the supply chain secured, we need a better connectivities. For example, this time for China, we found out that our cargo system is too weak. We didn't have much cargo plan. We have we use a lot of the the passenger plan to carry on a lot of the goods. But when the passenger airplane stopped, no passengers, people stopped moving, then we do not have the space for the cargo transportation. So we need a better equipped, with the transportation, improve the logistics. We may need more, the stock rooms in different regions, secure the supply chain can continue if anything like this happens. So this, I'm optimistic about the globalization, but I do see there is some need for adjustment. We're not talking about some other reasons, some other factors like someone want to have a decoupling, have a deglobalization, this kind of the trend also may make some impact. But I think that's not the long-term factor. We still need we need to look at the world from the long-term perspective. From that point of view, I would say I'm also optimistic. Okay, I stop here.
Thank you very much, Professor Fan. Michele, would you like to add anything or comment to what Professor Fan said, or shall we start to have a little bit of interaction?
Not just an anecdotal comment, in fact, on the very interesting and very true what Professor Fang said about the planes. When we were trying to ship some equipment, there were available and very free 737 passengers planes that we could rent for nothing, and it was very difficult indeed to get cargo planes. So this was a very unusual situation, how the mix of cargo and passengers planes was tailored to a certain type of model, and in emergency, it was like completely a pricing mismatch, impossible to find cargo. And of course, you could rent a normal passengers planes, A320 or 737 very easily. But I'll leave it to the questions of the audience and yourself. Thanks.
Yeah.
So, as I understand from both of you, I guess your assessment is that we are basically moving to a new model of a sort of new age globalization. However, I would like to deepen a little bit the discussion because there are rumors that some countries around the world are already starting to somehow launch policies and plans to support their production companies to move back the part of the supply chain in the home country. This was something that President Trump, with its America First program, started to do a few years back already. But it seems that this has been somehow extended to also some other countries at the moment. So you don't see, both of you, I would ask this question first to Professor Fan that didn't see this coming in his point of view. Do you think this kind of programs will be short-lived? It's just a reaction to the very immediate complexity and some kind of reaction of antibodies, or there will be a trend of reshoring within your own country?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I do see this is a factor which may have the impact on the globalization. You know, we got the trade war before this pandemic, and a lot of efforts from some country for decoupling, you know, want to rebuild the so-called independent supply system, industrial system, and ask companies to move back. And recently, they want to use the fiscal inputs to subsidize the moving back, the cost of moving back. However, I think no country, government can play a role in this regard, but the final decision will still be the company, right? They will make a judgment. They will, of course, I believe, as I said, regionalization of globalization. Some company, when they think about building new capacities, they may think more about their own country, because the country need this alternative. Country need somehow, the so-called supply chain security. So, yeah, they will make some plus if government gives subsidies. That will make them to be more willing to go. However, company think more other things, right? Company will think where the market, and company will think where and how their production cost, and how the infrastructures, how the communications, all the factors, and particularly the market, where the market, how they can benefit from other markets and benefit from the resources. So I do not see all the companies will withdraw from China. They may add more in US or other countries, but I don't think they will move out from China totally or partially. So far, the survey didn't show any, this kind of the willingness. And recently, we just got yesterday or today, we just got the American oil company, Exxon, just announced the start of the new company in China, in Guangdong or Guangxi province, chemical plant, big investment, it's a $10 billion investment in China. So I do see some impact from this political or strategic uh, policies, but I don't believe that will change the fundamental forces of the globalization. That's the company decision finally, and that the economic logic will behind this, not only the political causes.
Thank you, Professor Fan. Michele, would you like to add something on this point?
One other element, there may be indeed some company that reshore some of the production, but it is going to be very, very hard to bring back the whole value chain. So there may be some layers of the production that, according to some economic decision, like Professor Frank said about companies, and maybe some government incentive, some layers of this can be reallocated to other countries. But thinking to bring back home the whole value chain is very, very hard, because remember what I said at the beginning, in certain manufacturing sectors, and including software, scale dominates. So if you want to bring back home some of this production, you need to do it quickly in large quantities to go down the let's call it learning curve, but in this case to increase the number of the quantity of output to be able to compete on a cost base at par with the other manufacturing powers of the West. I think, Mattia, if our audience is mainly Italians, think of us. How could we? What do we do with? What do we bring back home from Vietnam, from China? Why would we do it? That's why I say it is very, very hard. It's difficult for government to have incentives, because you can have fiscal incentives, but before having a tax reduction, you need to make money, and in order to make money, you need to have a market, and the market is growing in Asia. Europe is going to be hit for the next several years. So we are also looking at a geographic displacement of producing where there is no demand, and that adds another level of difficulty. So yes, there are examples. There will be local impact at micro level. There will be companies that decided to go back. There will be also political campaigns. We are in election year in the US. Of course, there is a push to do that, to try to bring back production into the United States. But think of it, how do you bring a Foxconn production of iPad anywhere outside of where Professor Fang is now, outside of the Shenzhen area? What do? You bring assembly. How does Airbus bring back the final assembly line from Tianjin back to Toulouse? Difficult. So let's not get into some very high level media anecdote of some reshoring as an indication, as a necessary indication that this is a global trend.
Thank you, Michele. Very down to the point. Many spoke about the fact that the COVID-19 could be signing the de facto end of the Belt and Road Initiative. What's your reaction to this statement?
In what way does it end? The Belt and Road hasn't even started yet, in a way, and has many layers. Just a few weeks ago, China mentioned the Belt and Road of health, and indeed there has been some cooperation, exchanges, supplies, knowledge, and so on. So, like the Belt and Road is an umbrella that basically does this, in my view, very simple. It tells companies of all countries involved. It's not just China and Italy, it's all countries in the middle and not necessarily in the middle. So it's basically Africa, Europe, the whole of Asia. Basically, the governments tell the companies, now, if you want to engage with a company from another country, before, maybe you didn't know so much, you had difficulties, you were worried, you thought there would be legal problems, market entry, and so you did not invest. Now, with this umbrella framework, if there's a problem, tell us, the government, we talk to the government of the other country, and we will try to solve the problem by raising it at a higher level. This is the very simple gain of the Belt and Road. If everyone wants to take advantage of it, of course they can do it. If they think the risk is still so high and they don't want to engage it, they won't engage it. And again, I do tell our Italian friends, companies of other countries do take these opportunities, whether there is a formal agreement, an MOU or not, but they do engage in investment. Professor Fan just mentioned Exxon investing 10 billion. We have French, German companies, UK companies, American companies investing in, not just in China, but in the whole region of the Belt and Road. We Italian companies don't do it. Why don't we do it? And I think they're right, because we perceive a high level of risk. And the small size, average small size of our industrial sector, we have 4.2 million SMEs in Italy. We have a very few large companies that can take the hit of investing on a statistical manner across many countries. And this is a problem of our Italian industrial structures made up by SMEs. And I have to say, the problem of lack of knowledge and understanding of the risk and opportunities, and the extensive focus on the risks and not on opportunities. And I can make a list of all the critics that have said we shouldn't do this, we shouldn't do that, we cannot do technology. Even now talking about the contact tracing app, the focus is on privacy, then it's on 5G, then it's on selling our assets to foreigners, then there is a transfer of technology, know-how. The whole list is made up of risks. And we need to be more balanced and look also at the opportunities. Otherwise, we just stay at home.
Let's see what Professor Fan has to say on this, because we've been running a forum for the last 3 years on Belt and Road, and we are all both very concerned that where is it going to go?
Yeah, well, you know what? Now in China, for the economy, for all the industry sector, everything has slowed down. Everything, I would say, the negative, particularly the transportation. Transportation of the airplane, of the high speed way, all negative. Only one thing positive. That's the China-Europe trend. China-Europe trend increased during the first quarter by 15%. You know, other transportations mean that, you know, the decline, slow down, but this China-Euro trend increased by 15%. It shows this is a you know, part of very important infrastructure and the project, you know, for this you know, transportation. I think that's good. That provide alternative. You know, when you have the problem with the airplane, you have the problem with the cargo, you know, with the sea transportation, you need some other ways. So I think well, we may have some, you know, short-term, you know, stop or, you know, pause for some kind of project. But I think in the long run, people need alternatives, and the people need more infrastructures. So I do see, in the long run, this is for the long run, you know, interest of the people in the countries along this One Belt One Road. So this pandemic, it may last for quite a long time, 1 year, 2 years, but it is still short term. You know, we still need to look into the long term perspective.
Thank you, Professor Fan. Let's change a little bit the angle of the conversation. I think starting also from one point that you both mentioned, and Michele in particular, the COVID-19 is exposing SMEs worldwide to a liquidity crisis and difficult to pay or refinance debt. Many expect that there will be an increasing wave of international M&As coming out of this. A question for each of you. For Professor Fan, how do you see this affecting the globalization strategy of the Chinese companies? And for Professor Geraci, as Italy looks like one of the most severely affected countries, do you think we shall let the market economy play its harsh, possibly game, or shall we put some measures in order to shield the acquisition of core technologies?
So you want me
I would like your point of view about the side regarding the Chinese globalization and how this the COVID-19 and the situation after it will affect the internationalization strategy of the Chinese enterprises.
Yeah, I think there's some negative impact on Chinese companies for their views, for their strategies. They got hit very hard by the domestic pandemic and also by international pandemic. This supply chain, delayed of delivery and canceled the orders. They really get very hard, got hit. However, the last time when we have SARS, Chinese company also got hit, and also the financial crisis. I remember in the financial crisis time, 20 million, migrant workers just went home, to their countryside, lost the jobs, and the companies are, closed down. But when they recovered, they will continue look into all the opportunities of the market. So in the long run, I don't think that they will, to cancel their internationalization plan. Particularly the company like, internet companies, the supply chain, related logistic companies. When we have this pandemic, they saw the opportunities also increase. And also the new technologies. They want to, those companies, high tech companies, they see more opportunities in the global market. So recently I have a conversation with the CEO of some 5G application companies. They are starting to open offices all over the world. They now have the 20 office plan, in all the continents. It's already there, and they are moving. They're moving very fast in that regard. So I would say there's some mixed feelings about the globalization. But at the end of the day, these are companies. They are looking for opportunities. They are taking the venture. They are taking the risk, but they're going to, as long as there are opportunity there, they will look into it. Of course, all the factors, including the political, and other things, also have the impact. But generally speaking, I don't see they will withdraw.
Thank you, Professor Fan. Michele?
The question was on more market or more state. Am I right?
From your side, yes, more market or more state, correct?
I tell you, we all, I think economists agree that the market tends to be more efficient, and liberal trade and liberal market do bring benefits on average. However, we also know that there are some assumptions to this model. And the assumption to this model is full flexibility, full people movement, and that this process of adjustment happens in a relatively short period of time. With that premise, I can say that now we need to be more, let's say, state rather than market, because our Italian small, medium enterprises are the most exposed to these waves of globalizations. They do not adapt quickly enough to the changes for the reason we said before, and therefore, for the short term, they need to be protected. They need to be helped by the government. In this case of the coronavirus, what I've been arguing for the last 3 months is to freeze this period of 3 months and basically give helicopter money to both individuals and companies, so that when they wake up again on June 1st, when they can finally restart, hopefully, production and activity, it is as if it was the 1st of February again. So whoever loses, whoever fires people needs to be compensated so that the production capacity is intact at the beginning of June. Otherwise, we will be looking back at this year minus GDP 10% and saying, oh, that was a good year. Because the thing that worries me most is that people who find jobs, they leave Italy. Companies who need better market, they leave Italy. Company who would like to stay in Italy, they can't because they have lost money in 3 months. They've lost equipment. They have lost people. So the government now needs to intervene. It's very sad to having to have this conversation now at the end of April. This is something that we should have had at the end of January. So it's late, very late, but that's why the intervention needs to be now stronger. More government intervention, individual governments. If I may, today is the European Council to decide on what the EU should do for the European companies. We know nothing will be done within the time frame that is embedded in these global models of gains from liberalism. The decision process needs to be done very quickly. And if I may add, our industries, our companies, whether we like it or not, will compete with the Asian companies. And in Asia, the speed of execution, the implementation is immediate. We are facing competition and partnership with China, which is yes, a state and a market mixed economy, but decisions are done very quickly. They have the tools, the money, the scale, the people, the technology, and the system that makes decision process quick. This is what we have to compete with. So in this context, our small, medium enterprises, the bureaucracy, the legal system, the lengthy process we have in Italy will not be able to compete if we open up the market entirely. And so the government needs to intervene, but needs to do it well and fast.
Thank you, Michele. Let's go a little bit more in a broader view on the macroeconomic outlook. 8 trillion in global US dollar in global fiscal stimulus have been allocated to fight the coronavirus pandemic. However, the question for you is, are traditional macroeconomic tools like fiscal stimulus, interest rate cut, quantitative easing sufficient to counterbalance the effect of this crisis? Is it not too much of a slow tool to put into effect, because these kind of tools generally take into effect between 1 and 1 year and a half from the moment they are launched and they stabilize? Do we need something that is able to revive the economy in time zero, or otherwise we risk that within 1 year there will be no economy to revive? To both of you. Professor Fan, okay. Is there anything else that we can put to action? from the
Yeah.
microeconomic point of view?
Yeah. For the economy, that's basically that's what the government can do. On one side, to increase the fiscal stimulus, or cut the interest rate to help to create the demand. And on the other hand, you need to help the company which can keep the labor. I think the question is how to make it effective. Every country can use this policy. In some country, I see it's a huge, too much for me. It's helicopter money and a huge, unprecedented fiscal deficit. But how to make it effective? For example, I just raised the question for the thinking. If you say we will give everybody, who lost the job some amount of money, then actually you encourage companies to lay off people. And people know they got to lay off, they can get the government money, and then you encourage people leave the company. So that make the unemployment so easy. That's why some country, unemployment figures shoot just soar to the roof. On the other hand, if you can, you ask the company to keep the job, to keep the people, then you subsidize the company, which may actually encourage company to stay with the employment and encourage the people to stay with the company. And that will really, reduce unemployment rather than increase the employment. So that's another, perspective. And also how to spend your fiscal stimulus. I think, there are many bad news in Chinese economy. Now everything slowed down, particularly in the service sectors. But one thing, China may maintain some growth, not high growth, but may recover to some kind of the growth. One of the reasons is that we do investments. We do a lot of construction now. Construction is a kind of activity which you do not have very close social connectivity. I mean, not close distance. You can have some social distancing. At the same time, you can start construction. So that will, this is a fiscal money. Now there's a fiscal stimulus. They didn't announce something like 4 trillion, like what happened during the financial crisis, but actually quite a lot of money, central government, local government, pumping into the infrastructure building, which can keep the social distancing at the same time to restart the growth, the economic activity. So that's also, depend on you spend your money, your also how effective your spending can create the jobs and create the demand and to reopen the economic growth path.
Okay.
Yeah.
Two messages. What looked impossible yesterday, every day is becoming more and more likely. 10 years ago, we never thought the Lehman would go down. We never thought we'd have a financial crisis. We never thought that the oil price would be negative, even if for technical reasons, like 2 days ago. We never thought about this pandemic. So, and more will come with artificial intelligence, jobs. We haven't even discussed that will be a serious problem for Italy again. Now, the second message is we have been spending 2 months to discuss where to get the money from. Stimulus package, helicopter money, central bank, everything fine. The discussion is good, but we have not really addressed what to do with the money. And even if we in Italy manage to raise 200 billion euros from various sources, we really have no plan on what to do with it. We have no investment plan. We cannot have an investment plan because investment in the sectors like constructions, transport, infrastructure, which I think will be very welcome in Italy, take years to assign, takes years to do, takes years for the legal lawsuits against, and basically very few people will be inclined to make that investment. So the real question that we have not yet addressed is how to make good use of the money. And this is one of the big, really problem of our economic situation in Italy. It's not the lack of money, it's the lack of investment opportunity. It's the lack of ideas, not ideas per se, ideas that can be put into practice. And let's be honest, Mattia, if you gave me $10 million now, zero interest free, so let's not worry about interest rates as if it was the solution to all problems. What do I do with it? Do I invest in Italy? No. I'm sorry to say that, even with my former role, there are another 180 countries around the world that offer better risk return opportunities. And this is the role of the society, the government that needs to do to fix this, to make the country attractive for investment, not just foreign, but also domestic. You asked me before, do we need to do more market or more state? I say we need to have an industrial plan for the country, a completely control alt delete of the overall system. Otherwise, we just engage in discussion that are not relevant and are not of the magnitude that we need to bring the economy back on track. Because we have had zero GDP growth for the last 20 years. And the globalization is a disadvantage for Italy because young, smart people, the best, would leave. It's a self-selection problem. On average, those who have a better opportunity go away. And so that decreases on a Darwinian model, the average quality. So this is a bigger issue, but that's what I see as the main problem.
Thank you, Michele. Before opening the question from the participants, one last topic. I keep the most delicate part for the last. Globalization, of course, is linked to the geopolitical situation that will emerge after the COVID. So my question for you is, China's been facing increasing worldwide criticism of having somehow a sort of responsibility of not being able to do enough to stop the spread of the coronavirus pandemic. Without entering into discussion what do you think about this, or if you are pro, or what's your point of view on the matter. This is going to change the narrative of the after COVID geopolitical outlook. What do you think is going to be the situation after COVID in terms of geopolitical tensions and reactions of the country to these reciprocal, tensions and the criticism facing toward China? Professor Fan.
Well, it seems I'm not in the qualification to answer this question.
I know it's a tough one. But it will affect also the movement of the companies, investments, strategies.
Yeah. Well, I hope the international community could have a very solid, thorough, and scientific study research on all this blames. I think one of the you can imagine every country, At the beginning, this is a new virus. At the new virus, we don't know. It will be anywhere there going to be one period which you don't have the full information about it. You don't know how it affected. You don't know this is a new virus. You even don't know how it will infect it and how it will speed up, spread, and how serious is it. So at the beginning of this period of time, a lot of things are not very clear. It's difficult for the local government, for the central government to make a decision. Then, when we found this out, we do have the cases, and by study, you need a procedure, right? By study, then the people confirmed that there is a community infection. Then I think China took the most swift decision and action to contain this. So no flight or train or bus came out of Wuhan after the midday of January 23rd. No, nothing. International plan, domestic plan on all this. So that's a and then the whole country closed down and everybody with a mask. I went back to Beijing on the Chinese New Year day. That's January 25th from Davos. And when I landed, I saw everybody with a mask. So I think that's saved a lot of time for the world. And then how world take this message? That's the question. We already have some knowledge about it. In the beginning, we didn't have any knowledge of this. So that's a difficult time. Uncertainty, difficult times, that. But then we already have this information. We already know. We already sent the WHO, DNA samples, all the things we already know it's going to have the infection, community can infect, and how the other country do, how much time is wasted, Then the people, of course, people now frustrated. People blame, people try to find somebody responsible for that, accountable for. People cannot, take the virus accountable, but people want to take some country or some people accountable for that. So that's I think, that's understandable, those frustrations, but then you have a lot of criticism. So I really sincerely hope that international organization, UN, WHO, and the countries can really organize a thorough investigation and scientific approach, to into this case. And this also, can, give the world the kind of knowledge or information how to deal with it in the future. We will have this kind of things again and again. This generation, next generation, but anyway, so that's a reality we have to face.
Thank you very much, Professor Fan. So basically your point is, let's wait that the scientists will investigate the matter thoroughly, and this will be the argument to make sure that we manage to detonate the situation without too harsh conflicts on the matter. Michele, what do you think about this? Do you think how we will get out of it? Do you think this will create geopolitical tensions that will last in the coming future?
I think this is just another layer of the ongoing, let's say, dispute between two models, the East and the West, based on always lack of understanding, fear. Some fear is well placed, some fear is not placed. I think at the beginning of this conflict between the East and the West, there was the underestimate on the side of the West of how China would develop. This started in 2001 with the accession of China into the WTO. The West underestimated the progress, the transformation that China would undergo in the following 15 years. We were a little bit asleep. Now, suddenly, over the last few years, we have realized that China has made advances in many sectors, and of course, and the economy is doing relatively well, notwithstanding all the challenges, and we are not. So there is a layer of economic, there is a layer of political bias, of course. There is a level of security, geopolitics, but at the basis of it, there is the non-acceptance that other countries or other parts of the world are raising and do it better than us. This is China now. If in 50 years it was to be Africa overtaking Europe in terms of whatever new sectors, then we would have a geopolitical fight against Africa. Because when the empire lose relative strength, the reaction is always to do something to protect or to stop that decline. So for me, it's quite natural. There is no big news. It is dangerous because the rhetoric is too high, and really, what I've seen, what I read on the media, what I see, not just Italian but worldwide, is not always based on facts, and that's why, as an academic, I always encourage exchange of information, facts-based and numbers to the rise, rather than just making slogans that are in most cases done prior to some electoral deadlines. And this is, I think, what's going to happen in the next 5 months until November. So I see tensions verbally rising, but then behind the doors, I think China and the US, of course, will find a compromise. And if I may, the advice I give to our friends in Italy is don't get in the middle between US and China. Saying things against China to please our US friends will not help. It's best not to make any public statements, because let's let fact talk. My forecast is the US and China will find a equilibrium point, but both countries will remember what we have said, the position we have taken, and that will not be helpful for ongoing business opportunities. When you don't know, it's best not to open the mouth.
Thank you. Let's take the first question. I will address the question to Professor Geraci first. I suggest we keep the answers as short as possible so we can take more. The first question is, do you expect a rise in the cost of transportation, like airfares, train, ship, etc., be a possible cause of inflationary tendencies?
The rise of transport costs of inflation? No, not so much. No, because the transport is now at overcapacity. So there will probably, as I mentioned before, if you want to buy a 737 or rent it now, is relatively very, very cheap. We have a price of commodities going down, price of fuel going down. That, of course, fuels transport. So we have, in a way, the whole value chain of transport at overcapacity, both in terms of oil, in terms of ships, in terms of planes, and in terms of trains. So no.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's take the next question. Do you think that once populations will exit from their respective lockdowns and start to realize what happened, they will start to point finger at China, consciously or politically or unconsciously ban Chinese products? So there will be some kind of reactions against products coming from China. Professor Fan, what do you think?
I don't know. I don't know if people will take that on the label of made in China. I really don't know. But I think most people are rational. Most people will believe the truth, will respect the fact, and will not, not blame the Chinese goods for what happened. But it happened. It happened between country to country. People uh, protest against the production, against the goods when they have something to do with other people. But I don't think that's well. I believe eventually people will be rational. Uh, People will uh, eventually scientific knowledge will prevail rather than emotional action.
Michele, what do you think? Do you think there will be some kind of rejection of Chinese products or not? We're talking mostly about consumer products, I guess.
Well, first of all, I don't think most of Italian consumers really know where the products come from, and it's going to be very difficult to separate. But there is no alternative. So if you don't want to buy made in China consumer products, where do you buy them? And probably you buy them at a higher cost. So, there may be some initial anti-China, but I don't see it because it would have happened already. It's already gone. I think we passed this. And then economic decision, especially in a country like Italy, where there will be millions of unemployed people. I don't think we have the luxury to choose more expensive products just to feel better. And so, in a way, this would be a buffer to any made in China products because the economies, as I said, in China dominate any alternative. So there is nowhere else to buy them from.
Thank you. Let's publish.
Mattia.
Yes.
So far, there's no, rejection of Chinese-made medical supplies.
Actually,
very rational.
Me and all the friends of that are CEO and general managers of Italian companies here, we've been buying a lot of Chinese masks and Chinese products to ship back to the headquarters and our friends. So, and nobody refused it.
Yeah.
Including ventilators. Let's publish a question. As an entrepreneur, I need security for my investment plans. And this requires a high level of transparency, which somehow I don't see entirely applied in China. Can we expect Chinese companies to step up and provide somehow an increased level of transparency? We're talking, I guess, about information, joint ventures, management, and so on. What do you think, Professor?
Actually, I think this is the issue have been there for quite a time, and I also always said that more communications between the company and the government will be helpful. And Chinese government, promised to make a further opening and a further transparency for all the companies for the policy making. So I really think the companies and the chambers of chamber of commerce, like Italy and Europe, and to have more communication with the Chinese government. Chinese company also have that kind of the problem. They want to know more about what the government policy and the government decisions and how the transparent with the company, Chinese company themselves. So we're facing the common problem. So that is a part of the system we needed to have with more reforms. Government now promise more reform, promise more opening, but we need to push them to go on that the direction more and more with the real steps, real measures instead only announcement. So that's I agree.
Thank you, Professor Fan. Let's get to the next question. Michele, I'll address this to you. The COVID-19 crisis impacted Europe more than China, and this may lead to more production problems and increased costs in Europe. Do you think this will increase somehow the imports from China?
I'm sorry, do you think this will increase the
imports
from China?
Will we import more because our industrial capacity has been impacted and therefore we are weak and we are not able to cope up with our needs, basically?
Well, if that was the case, that would be a good thing. One of the main reasons in the slides I show you, I was looking at Italian loss of exports to China. But the main worry for our economy is that we do not get enough supplies and components from China. So if we do not have a capacity, imports to bridge this production gap would be very welcome. Because it is not the type of import that would destroy jobs. It's not competing. It is, if I understand the question correctly, is we cannot make it. So how do we sell? How do we transform things? Then we need to buy more inputs to be able to transform and then resell them. So if we find ourselves into a lack of production capacity, then imports are welcome. I want to, if I may, we should not look at imports as the evil. We could just immediately stop buying coffee from Colombia and we would have no trade deficits. But of course, that would affect all our retail, bars, and food and beverages industry. So imports, especially in manufacturing, are good in specific sectors, not so good in others. So for me, it's not a worry. It would be a welcome development if that's what's needed.
Thank you, Michele. Let's publish the next question for Professor Fangan. Globalization is fostered by common standards. Do you think that possible disagreements about hygienic sanitary standards among countries might hinder international trade? Also considering that some countries might use this strategy to block imports for political reasons.
Sorry, I didn't follow the question. What is blocked in by political? What is the standard?
Yeah, there are different standards regarding hygiene and sanitary standards. I think there is also a sort of reference to fresh markets in China. This is something being condemned abroad. So would this somehow impact or hinder the international trade? And could be this weaponized somehow to political reasons?
I still not yet follow up this question very much, but if we're talking about the technology standard, I think it, or standard of making business, I think China is learning. Chinese companies are learning, and Chinese are using, the international standard, try to improve their product. And if they go any country, for example, if they go Europe, they will follow the Europe standard for the technology and for the product. I don't think there's any political motivation behind that to change the standard or use another standard. Other people will not accept it. If not follow the local standard. I'm not sure. This is the question, but that's my guess.
Thank you, Professor Fan. Michele, one question for you regarding the increasing globalization and the interconnection with the capability of multinationals to move taxes and choose the countries where they want to pay in order to basically reduce the tax bills. How can we make multinationals pay the taxes where they should do? And if this does not happen, do you foresee that there may be tax revolts?
Tax wars.
Tax revolts. let's say, revolution against taxes, complaints from nations to other nations that taxes are not paid in the right place and something should be done to fix it?
This is a very complex issue. First of all, I do believe that because every country has independent fiscal policy, I am in favor, maybe against the mainstream, that countries apply whatever tax rate they want. So if Holland, that has been criticized, has a favorable tax rate that incentivizes investments there, so be it. At the end of the day, this is what I would also like to do for Italy. If I may, when we were in government, we would have liked to bring the famous flat tax to a lower tax rate. So we do have to compete, and we cannot force other people to raise tax. If anything, we have to lower taxes for our own companies. This is the best response to so-called tax haven or unfair tax competition, is to compete and bring, like as it happens in any industry, when you want to compete with someone else, you don't force other companies to increase prices, you force yourself to be more efficient and lower your own cost. And that's what we should do. When it comes to like the web tax and things like that, that's a bit more complex because we have production. You can tax on production, on location of production. You can tax on location of sales. Then you have intra-company transfer pricing issues. But at the basis of all this, there is always that initial situation. Where is more convenient for multinationals to have their own headquarters? And again, if Holland does it in a favorable manner, why should we not do the same in Italy? If we manage to do that, the problem would dissipate by itself because companies would be attracted to come to Italy like they did in Ireland.
Thank you, Michele.
You know, Mattia, the message is, I think in all many questions and the debate I had in the last few months is always, we always complain about other people's. We must stop looking at other people's fault and say, that's unfair, that's the fault, the Dutch don't want the Eurobond, the Dutch have low tax, the other countries do dumping. We have to react, not complain. We have to stop complaining and see if we can react, because this is how things are.
I entirely agree with this statement. Let's go to the next question for Professor Fan. If globalization increases further, but global GDP decreases, at least for the next few years, let's say, this means that the gap, the income gap between the rich and the poor of the world may widen. Do you foresee social instability coming out from this? And this was actually also one of the points of discussion I had. Rich and poor countries had different capability to react in terms of fiscal stimulus and policies to address the issue. Do you think multilateral agencies should intervene more in order to support them to rebalance the situation?
Yeah, I think this is a very important question. You know, we are going to go through a very difficult time. I'm not saying we are going to have a Great Depression like what happened in the 30s, but I would definitely see the global economy will be slow, you know, some kind of depressed for some years, you know, not 1 year, 2 year, but I would say 3 to 5 years. So during the crisis, during the depression, of course, the most vulnerable people are, you know, poor people and the poor country. So this is really need to worry by all people, particularly by the politician, you know, by the elites and by the global organization. So how to, you know, we have a lot of the international organizations, and we have a lot of the, you know, multinational companies. How, you know, this organization and companies can do to help the poor people, poor country. So that's the urgent question now. You know, for some poor countries, you know, this pandemic is still not yet to have a full age development. it would be horrible if some countries get the situation, serious situation, then the poor people will hit more. So that's why I really think all the government and the global, international organizations should do more, should be joint efforts to do more to deal with this inequality. This is going to be, if not, I do see the social disability, and maybe somewhere could be to have a chaos. I mean, it could turn into disaster for some countries. That's really worried me.
Thank you, Professor Fan. Let's go to the next question, and I will let you two decide who wants to reply to it. On April 9th, Beijing released a comprehensive roadmap on how to make institutional changes on production factors, including land, labor, capital, technology, and data. It is by far the most important reform guideline unveiled by Xi Jinping's administration following the Deepening Reform Initiative that was released in November 2013 in the third plenum. What do you expect from it?
People have talking about this kind of reform, reform on all the market, labor, capital, land, and a lot of things are going on as well. For example, land reform, rural reform, which are really have been there for a while, and some small measures are already taking place. So things are definitely moving into that direction, and more market forces will play the role, and more legalized the rights, the property rights will be implemented. So, and I think that's all good, good for the development of Chinese economy, and good for the more efficient use of all those factors, labor, capital, land, all those things. So, and also that will provide opportunities for everybody. When you have the legal framework, you can more transparency and more rule-based system. It will be good for everybody, Chinese or non-Chinese companies, to operate in the Chinese economy. So that's provide opportunities for everybody. So that's actually the good development, and I'm happy they didn't forget this. This pandemic really make the government penalize on many other issues, but they still remember they needed to have pushed this reform forward. So that's good for the Chinese economy in the long run.
Thank you very much, Professor Fan. Let's get to the next question. One of the consequences of COVID is also the sharp decrease of oil and energy commodity prices. This is a clear advantage for China, which is short of oil and gas, and a disadvantage for many countries such as US, Russia, and Middle East. How may this affect future commercial relationship? For example, the current discussion between US and China on commercial issues. Michele, would you like to reply to this one, or both of you? Professor Geraci, would you like to reply to this first?
I tell you, Russia, I'm mostly worried about it because of its high dependence on export, which is mostly on oil. And we're looking back at what happened a few years back. If you recall, very high, Mr. Putin had to increase overnight rates, if I go to almost 20%, 17% to stem the capital outflow and entice people to buy rubles and to support the currency, which kind of semi-worked a little bit. We do in Italy, we do need these commodities. I give a provocative answer. Should we use part of these 200 billion to store a little bit of this oil that we don't have, that we buy from outside, with the view to use it when we restart production? Do we have this plan, this insight to take advantage of market conditions? to lower our average price cost of energy, which is a key component of our manufacturing industry. I ask the question this time, I don't answer.
Professor Fan.
Well, definitely that's a good news for the resource scarcity country. My only worry is we don't have a lot of the storage to buy more, at these low prices. But I would say even though I would say turmoil is not good, upside down, this is become a crisis. I think that is not a good thing. But of course, this is also depends on this pandemic. It really reduced the demand for the market. So I do, as economist, I like to have a stability. I have the equilibrium, right? So even that's good for China, but I would like to see the market go back to normal equilibrium rather than in a turmoil.
Thank you, Professor Fan. Before we publish the next webinar calendar, I would like to ask a very China-related questions to both of you from myself. The PBOC injected 3 trillion yuan, which is about 424 billion US dollar, about 3% of the Chinese GDP, as fiscal stimulus. And many say that this has underscored the fiscal stimulus that has been done by other countries, especially USA, Japan, and even Europe. In a webinar a couple of weeks ago with Professor David Lee, his point of view is that PBOC was saving the big ammunitions, the big guns, for the latter part of 2020 or possibly the initial part of 2021, where he thinks China may need some additional space for supporting the economy, either as a consequence of the impact on its trading partners, international countries like USA, Japan, and Europe, and as well from the pressure that may come towards China at a larger scale. What's your point of view on this? Do you think that's what is in the mind of the regulators in China at the current time?
You ask me?
Yes, absolutely, and that's also Michele.
Yeah. Well, Chinese now still have a very fresh memory of what happened in 2009, 8 and 9 during the financial crisis. Chinese did a so-called 4 trillion package. Actually, the 4 trillion didn't reflect the real number. But real number is something to do with the chaotic situation which Chinese central government lost the control of local government borrowing behaviors. So that created the financial turmoil, financial chaos, which created the problem for the next 10 years. So that's why this time Chinese government seems quite conservative about what they are doing. They want to keep a balance. So that's what I would like to make a judgment of that. They saw their own experience with the financial crisis was that we lost the balance, we lost the equilibrium. It's too much, debt ratio too high, and the investment too much, and the overcapacity and all those things. So the leverage too long, too high, all those kind of things. So this time, even Chinese economy facing these problems, they are not really, eager or, crazy about doing more. So they may do more, of course, and they promise to do more, and they will do, but in an orderly way, keeping the balance I think that's a good approach, and they are learning how to manage during this situation. So I think that this is not too bad. You don't need to hurry, into the situation. This is another 1 month, 2 months. Chinese are not facing an election ahead in a couple of months. So why worry? Why hurry? Let's take steps. Let's take pace. So yeah, I think we suggested more, Chinese policies, but we also should understand their consideration, their concerns. Okay.
Thank you very much. Michele, what do you think about what the fiscal stimulus that has been done by the PBOC and possible upcoming measures?
I think I agree with Professor Fang. It needs to be done carefully. The risk of inflation needs to be managed, but this is again the message for our entrepreneurs is this is the kind of system we are competing with. You mentioned, Mattia, China, Japan, United States, and Europe are doing fiscal stimulus. I haven't seen really anything from Europe, and this is whether we like it or not, we are facing increasing tightening competition with countries that have a monetary policy discretion, and they do it quickly. I think China will do, and they will do a lot in infrastructure, increased transport. In 2008, 2009, we were complaining that the stimulus package of China was a bit wasted on high-speed rail. And maybe partly it was, but now China has the fastest and most efficient and longest high-speed rail network in the world, with 30 going to 40,000 kilometers. In Italy, we have 1,500. That doesn't even work nowhere close to that of China. So that's when I said at the beginning, we have a fiscal stimulus. First of all, you need to be able to do it, so you need to be able to print money or find it somewhere, and then you need to know how to spend it. And that's why, if I can link back together, I said we need more money. We need to know where we spend it. We need to know more state, less market, and we need to give our companies a little bit of a buffer, because they cannot compete against these mega blocks around the world. They have flexibility, means, and tools to do much better than us. We talk, they do. That's the difference.
Okay, grazie Michele, thank you Professor Fan. I think we could close here, and I will ask my colleagues in Italy to publish the calendar